What's up, everybody? Greg J. Coffee Conversations is on. Good morning. Thursday, July 8th, 2021. We thought we were coming out of this COVID thing. How's your family doing? Keep an eye on everybody. Did you get vaccinated? Are you wearing your mask still? It's a lot going on. One time they tell us it's all good. The next time they're telling us it's new variants going around and it's just a mess, yo. So I guess the best thing in this day and time is just to, do the best that you can in looking after their prescribed precautions and just keep yourself safe. Shoot, hey man, it's a lot in the air, right? Deeply contemplative on today. I'm really excited for this show. I'm really excited to have met our guest this morning. If you know anything about me, I'm all about the music history, especially Black American music. I love those conversations. I love the stories. My entire 30 plus broadcast career has been deeply immersed, right, in the whole Black music history, the essence of Black culture, arts. Hey, that's just how I was molded, and that's a good thing. And really thankful that now at this time of my life, I'm able to go into other genres, other cultures now with my work at the Arts Council for Long Beach. Really happy for that. But at my epicenter, at my core, is the history of us musically. Yeah, from a Black American perspective, but as we always like to say and tell you here, we're global. So I'm looking at the whole diaspora. And we've had a lot of artists, record executives, radio people from over on the continent visit with us and share their perspectives, and all of that adds into the total equation. So today, so I was brought up on this, made aware of this story that was on WNYC. They have a podcast series called Radio Lab that's really popular in our podcast world. And it was called The Vanishing of Harry Pace. Okay, it's like, okay, who's Harry Pace? So I listened to the series. It's 5 episodes and everything. And it was phenomenal. Harry Pace, the founder of the first African-American owned record company, back in the day. And I'm talking, 1900s and all that. And I'm not going to give too much away because I need our expert to come on and break it on down, right? And so that's what's up there. But before we get into that, a couple of headlines I just want to kind of briefly comment on. Number one, as we talk about history, right? So here in Long Beach, California, where we originate, the news was that somebody defaced the statue of Dr. Martin Luther King over there in Martin Luther King Park, marked him up with a swastika and a SS symbol. I saw the pictures, and I'm just saying, one of the news publications said it looked like, no, it was. That's what it would call it. What it is, dude, is just like a swastika on his chest and the SS symbols on his knee is what it was, right? And I just feel like, it just was a reminder that we have so much more work to do, because hate is still in the land. It doesn't just disappear because we took to the streets. Action is needed against the systemic racism and prejudice and all of that. But don't think it's just going to evaporate and go away. There's people who harbor that sickness in their heart. That's why it's so important for us to tell our stories. It's essential for us to tell our history. We have to tell that. Remember, Miss Nicole over there, earlier this week, we talked about her refusing her tenure at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to go on over to Howard University. There was some controversy over her 1619 project. People don't want to hear the real history, the real American history. And we have to be about telling our story in this day and time. We woke up to the news yesterday that the president of Haiti had been assassinated, and it's interesting how the various news networks are covering that story. And I really have to give it up to the Black News Channel for starting out their coverage, giving a history lesson of Haiti. You know that it was founded after a slave revolt. How many of you know about Toussaint Louverture? And it remains in abject poverty, never recovering from the colonial taxes that France has imposed on it. And did you know that there are 14 countries on the continent of Africa that were colonies of France who still pay a colonial tax to France as a condition of their independence? These are the systems of racism that we fight against. These are the systems of racism that have been in place for so many years, so many generations. And now we're in a time of a cultural awakening, I think. I think the George Floyd murder put us on a stance of cultural revolution. And while we're in cultural revolution, we have to be aware of these stories all across the globe. And so it brings me to today. I didn't know about this guy, Harry Pace. I didn't know. I did not know about Mr. Bill Doggett, who is joining us this morning. As a matter of fact, the question I want to ask him, let's bring him in here. He is a historian, a culture connoisseur. I mean, in the last week or so, thank you, Albert Lord, for making this introduction. I'm looking at his website and talking to him. I'm like, dang, his record collection is like off the chain, going back all the way back to I don't know if you guys know about, okay, we download music nowadays, but we had 8 tracks, we had 45s, we had LPs. You know what I'm saying? 33 and a third was the LP in my day. And then in my mom and dad's day, there was the 78s. This brother here got the cylinders. He used to be on a cylinder, to play their records back in the day. It's like, yo, what? Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Doggett. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Greg, for that introduction. Yes, I do have a few cylinders, but more of the cylinders are from the dawn of recorded sound, which is 1895-96. But many of them were licensed and syndicated for these flat discs. So I have more of the cylinder material in early flat discs at 1900, 1902 on through about 1905, 1906. But yes, it is interesting to look at the trajectory of how we come to understand and enjoy entertainment in recorded sound. It's quite a history. Yes, indeed.
Now, before we get into there, Mr. Doggett, the only Bill Doggett I know was like a bebop artist. Are you related?
That's my uncle. Yes, he's
wow.
Bill Doggett, actually William Doggett, William Ballard Doggett the first. I'm William Ballard Doggett the second. Was the king of 1950s R&B jazz organ, who created that famous landmark monument of instrumental rock and roll at the dawn of rock and roll called Honky Tonk Parts 1 and 2 for King Records. Yeah, that's my uncle.
Wow, isn't that incredible? It just dawned on me actually last night as I was getting ready for it today. I was like, wait a minute, Bill Doggett.
Yes, Bill Doggett, and it has, it's percolated through all my entire life, and especially when I was before I had met Albert Lord as the house photographer for BET. There was I had 12-year run between 1987 and 1999 as the private photographer for the Black Emmy and Black Oscar dinners, which were put on co-sponsored by BET, very private event. And and part of that whole journey there was the same thing that you're talking about today, which is that people remember that name. And, and at that time and shortly before then, when I was working for radio, I actually worked for Kiss FM, for K-Big, and I think it was for the Pop Cage Day, when they had
Mighty 690.
Right, when they were on Venice Boulevard. Yeah. And during this time, people said, not the building. You're not related to the building. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also in marketing, and I'm a photographer, and I do all of the people said to me, it's funny, there were openings at K-Big in sales, and people said, you really should apply for this job in sales. I mean, your whole package is sales and marketing. And so, and that's true. So, but I'm also a historian, so.
All right, so let's get to the meat of the matter. I mean, I know that you have a plethora of subject to speak about, and we're gonna have you back, back again. But I really want to kind of explore this, the whole essence of Black Swan Records, and my partner and I are very interested in early 1900 Black life. We've been able to find things in the public domain and study, what was what in terms of cultural, music, arts, and culture back in the day. What did our great grandparents, enjoy? What kind of music? What was the story behind them? All of this. So when I learned about this story about Harry Pace and Black Swan Records, I was like, wow, this is really deep. Before Motown, before all of our Black-owned music entities, there was Black Swan Records. Talk a little bit about that, and then let's get down to business on who is Harry Pace.
So Black Swan Records was actually technically the second record company. First, there was the George C. Broome special phonograph record. George C. Broome was a Black entrepreneur in the Boston area. His very brief run, about maybe 8 months, the Broome special record was done. His company was done or founded and survived for a moment in 1919. But Harry Pace, his creation of the Black Swan Record Company, which was based in Harlem at the dawn of the Harlem Renaissance, essentially the idea of it was coming to pass during 1920, and then it was formally open for business in 1921. That was a very important statement of understanding of one of America's, certainly in the North, one of America's most important underknown, as we're discovering, underknown and lost history of Harry Pace. Harry Pace had been the business partner of W.C. Handy. And W.C. Handy's music publishing business was actually called Pace and Handy. And they were located in Memphis, and they moved to New York. But what the essence of this is that Harry Pace, being the very smart business entrepreneur that he was aware of what was going on with the recording of songs of W.C. Handy that were sheet music being recorded by the record companies, the leading record companies of the time, and their artists, companies such as Columbia Records, Victor Records, Edison Records, and others. And at this time in American history and in the recording industry history, white artists there's this pattern of systemic racism, if you will, that white artists were given the agency to record the songs of Black, popular music composers, like, for example, Bob Cole and J. Rosamond Johnson, a very important turn of the century Black writing team. Perhaps the inspiration, if you will, for Motown's Holland Dozier Holland. Bob Cole and J. Rosamond Johnson had major hits on Broadway, major shows on Broadway, and their sheet music, of course, were big sellers. But the recordings were never able to record because there was a color bar, essentially, that permeated the record industry until the dawn of Harry Pace. Harry Pace's goal was an acknowledgement of the fact that there was money to be made in the record business, and then that there was this exclusionary kind of pact to keep Black artists out. And he also was acknowledging and very paying a lot of attention to the important piece here, which is in 1920, a young upstart record company owned by, I think, a couple of Jewish entrepreneurs, the OK record label, had actually developed a rapport, or a rapport came about with one of the premier, I'm going to say, early jazz and blues pianists and composers of the time. And I'm going to say the time is right before World War I, all the way through, I'm going to say, the mid-20s. And that's Perry Bradford. Perry Bradford approached OK Records with a then just beginning to be known African-American blues singer by the name of Mamie Smith. He was able to convince the OK Record label to record one of Mamie Smith's songs, if you will, actually two songs. There was a flip, 78s have two sides, and that was the format in, and at this time period was 78 RPM record. But that first recording she was showcased or backed, if you will, by a white band. The record was okay, but Perry Bradford came back to OK, suggesting Mamie Smith do another of his two tunes. I mean, he was quite a writer, Perry Bradford at the time, but to also have a black blues band back her. And that record was Crazy Blues, one of the hit that really was the breakthrough hit for African Americans in recorded sound and in blues, was the 1920 OK Records recording of Perry Bradford's song Crazy Blues, performed by Mamie Smith and a black-backed band. That record took off. That was one of the biggest sellers that, let's say, put it in our contemporary time, or in my contemporary time, I'm going to date myself. That record was, for its time, what Stop in the Name of Love or Baby Love or Ain't Too Proud to Beg was in the Motown era. It just took off. And Harry Pace saw that. He was paying close attention to that. And he saw that in the mix of the fact that the history in the music and the recording industry to date, up to 1920, was that, there was this cultural appropriation, essentially, that these white music publishing business was making money, lots of money off of black songs. Then white artists had the inside track to record. They had the recording contracts, if you will, with Victor, Columbia, Edison. This was for its time, in our time, a revolutionary act, if you will, of a colored man, thinking that he could join the business by creating a all colored, owned, staffed record company, showcasing colored, or I'm going to say that's colored was the term used then, and so I'm being specifically dated. But that a company that was owned by African Americans, that was run by African Americans, staffed by African Americans, and showcasing talent, African American talent, emerging and promising talent, was in itself a revolutionary act, and it was met, unfortunately, with quite a bit of resistance. But yeah, please go forward.
Okay, yeah. So look, I'm putting up a picture of Mamie because let me see if we can get that a little closer. I don't think so, but there it is, y'all. There's Mamie Smith. So, all right, how big is Mamie? Beyonce big?
Mamie Smith is for that time period, yes, but not as. I mean, she. I'll say this simply, that Mamie Smith is huge for her time. There are other blues singers in the 1920 to 22 time period, but I would say Mamie Smith is probably the biggest one. Of course, it is by 1923, 24, when Bessie Smith shows up, that everything changes. But there are a number of blues singers, in the black circuit, because black performers could not perform in integrated situations on stage until essentially Benny Goodman, Benny Goodman in I'm going to say 1935, 36, when he brings, to his band, pianist Teddy Wilson, and vibraphonist Lionel Hampton, and steel guitar, electric guitarist Charlie Christian. It's Benny Goodman that integrates jazz. But it's Harry Pace by extension and by connection that creates this idea that there is a Black market, a Black demographic market, and a Black interest in phonograph records, to the point that he feels that it is important to address that market, which was not being addressed. There was this great business opportunity, essentially, and I think that was brilliant. Very much so. There's more to much more in sense of a drop-down menus to the story, but I think the important piece for your listeners to understand is that prior to the arrival of Harry Pace, African-American artists, many of whom were outstanding, including his business partner, W.C. Handy, who had an all-Black band. W.C. Handy could not record his music. It was the original Dixieland Jazz Band, which was mostly white and Jewish, who recorded the first, quote, jazz records, which were in 1917, 1918. They recorded W.C. Handy before W.C. Handy could record W.C. Handy. So this is part of the challenge in the music business that was. And so, yes, I speak to a lot of that. So I think, yeah, please. I've said plenty, I think, for a moment.
Sure. So, all right. I'm on your website over here, and let me see if I could just go ahead and share this. So I'll try to play some of these, and we just don't want Facebook to trip or try to.
You might not want to play those two. They are difficult. They're more. Well, actually, you could. You're welcome to play them. I think your challenge. Let me actually, if I had known you wanted to do this, I could have sent you some other tracks. But yeah, what I would say to you, the challenge of, there's a lot to say. I will just say, specific to the two sound files I have on my website on the recorded, you're probably on the recorded sound page. Those are two very powerful recordings that demonstrate the challenge of being Black and being able to have an idea of human rights and self-determination, because there was this overarching emphasis on I'm going to say the demonization and the degradation of Black life through coming out of minstrelsy. And those two particular records are classic examples. So,
all right, so let's go for it. And if we get digged, we get digged. I'll just put it in our website and dispute it later. But just for sake of what we're trying to do here, right? And I'm going somewhere with this question here. But first of all, Bill, the one on the left here, what's the name of that song?
It's after I believe it's Afterlife on the Levee. It's part of it's a ending, if you will, of a minstrel skit. It's done from 1902. I consider this to be the first Old Man River. It is only part of the recording, but it uses, if you think about Paul Robeson, how significant Paul Robeson was to Black lives and to defining and changing the idea of dignity in Black lives. The original song of Old Man River, written by Jerome Kern, has, opens with, I'll just say that Paul Robeson changes the N word to darkies. Darkies all work on the Mississippi. Darkies all, this particular recording speaks to that many years before. And this recording from 1902 is emblematic of the idea of the Lost Cause Confederacy, the idea of Black men being on the Mississippi, what I'm going to call them, essentially the docks, about the supremacy still post-Civil War, post-Reconstruction of the power, the economic power of cotton. And that, as sharecroppers and as workers, the dock workers, still the power of cotton, of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, all of that world, the iconography of that world is put into sound. This record or this song is from a minstrel show in live theater that has been brought into recorded sound. The challenge of all of this music and this iconography of minstrelsy put into the new toy, the adult toy, the iPhone, the iPad of 1900, is that the messaging, this degrading or buffoonish messaging about Black life and Black identity, especially the negativity that is, I'm going to say laser focus is what the word I was going for. Laser focus on Black men, not Black women, but Black men. And that connects way back, if we're talking about history, also to the laser focus on Black men as criminal or difficult in slavery. The runaway slaves and the bloodhounds, that wasn't so much about women. That was more about Black men. The slave revolts in the 17th, 18th century, Denmark Vesey in the Carolinas, and then Nat Turner. That was all about men. So I think I very much feel that there's this through line from that time period into the obvious Jim Crow era, with 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, which concretized this idea of separate but equal. That shows up in the messaging of Lost Cause and in the minstrelsy, and then is put commercially into recordings. And you'll hear that in that first one.
All right, let's check it out, y'all. Let's check it out.
All that cotton there, niggas, the folks are waiting. Money in your pocket. Now, before you have your chicken feast with watermelon finish, I want to ask you all, what you going to do in the winter, huh?
Wow.
That's 1902. That's 1902. And what's significant about that, that's from a skit that was in live theater. But as you can hear, and the use of the N-word is everywhere at the dawn of recorded sound. So this iconography, this imaging, this messaging, and this is something I specialize in. I think if I can be so bold to say that, I think I'm probably one of a needle in a haystack, I guess is the best way of putting it, on a national basis, of having a early sound recording archive, and I'm speaking from 1900 to 1940, expressly focused on race and race consciousness and race messaging in recorded sound. I have a lot to say, and I have this wonderful archive, which is part of why I came to the attention and am on the radar in the world of basically the Library of Congress, Recorded Sound Division world. But the messaging there is you hear the N-word straight out, you hear a visual, it creates a visual that, after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, here you have Black men working, the only work they could get, like laborers today that you see at Home Depot, is they could work on the, lifting cotton bales into the Mississippi steamboats that would, have their various different delivery destinations. But the idea is that we are, not only are we sharecroppers, but we are still slaves. Niggers, it's like, what you gonna, I love it. Like, so you're getting money now, and before you have your fried chicken and your with watermelon fittings, you got money now. What you gonna do in the wintertime? And it's it very much it predates visually and audio the image of Paul Robeson in the 1938, I think Universal film about that sequence of Old Man River that I use in teaching. I have a whole act, if you will, a shtick as a presenter. But it's important to talk about this because, in my opinion, because when we look at George Floyd and we look at and Ahmaud Arbery and even we're not talking about that today, but there's a whole nother world about mammies, about Black women as mammies and only as mammies. But when we look at the foundation, creating a commercialized foundation for an idea set around race and race identity, especially for Black men, is extraordinary. This is particularly so in the second recording, which is from 1920. It is Walter Kelly, who's the uncle of the famous 1950s movie star Grace Kelly. He's like Mel Blanc. He is a multi-voice, talented voiceover guy, if you will, recording in 1920. This is the first side of two sides of the Virginian judge, which he did more of, if you will, if I could be so bold to say. This was such a hit, not a hit for us, and it was never recorded for us. This is considered a humorous dialogue, or what was popularly known at the time as a darky, a darky skit. But it was for white audience consumption because at this time, between 1900 to 1920, with the exception of Harry Pace and some of the more well-to-do people in the North, already in the North, the vast extent of African Americans were in the South and because of Jim Crow, were forced into a semi-slavery of being sharecroppers, picking cotton still. Picking cotton is part of sharecropping that's not talked about, or working, as many women did at the time, working in the big house, doing, washing and ironing and, taking care of. It's very. If I think you hear, and as I'm putting across this whole challenge after Emancipation Proclamation, with Andrew Johnson and with this whole reinstatement of the states that were in the Confederacy, there is this incredible resistance to giving Black people dignity and freedom, even though there are these constitutional amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, eliminating slavery, giving citizenship, giving the right to vote. We are still seeing in 2021 this resistance to Black people being given the right to vote and participate in. So these themes are through lines from actual history and then into American entertainment at the dawn of the 20th century. Dawn of the 20th century, for some reason, and I wish I could go back and travel back in time and understand why, white America was obsessed with minstrelsy. This was the overarching entertainment for white America. I'm going to say from 1880 to about 1912. And then, silent movies come in. And then, of course, in 1915, you have the blockbuster, you have the Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back of its time, which is D.W. Griffith's, Birth of a Nation, which, again, creates the same messaging. It's a glorification of the Ku Klux Klan and a demonization, in particular, of Black men. And you hear that in The Virginian Judge.
Let's give it a listen, y'all.
Order in the court here. You niggers get out of that window. It's hot enough in here now. First case on the docket, Willie Gaylor.
Yes, sir. Coming right up, Judge.
10 days. Going right down, Willie. Lock him up, Dan. Next case, Henry Harper. Is that nigger here again, Dan? Bring him out. Drunk again, eh, Henry?
Yes, sir. Certainly does keep you busy, don't it, Judge?
You've been arrested about 5 times the last 6 weeks, haven't you?
Yes, sir. I would have been here that other week, but I got arrested over in Phoebus. I couldn't come.
What have you been drinking?
But, Judge, I didn't drink much. I just inhaled some of that bootleg gin. Doggone, just make a rabbit spit in a bulldog's face.
Where have you been the last week?
Dog, if I know, Judge, seems like I've been up in heaven.
How'd you get back?
I don't know. I must have slid down on a rainbow.
You better take 10 days to remove the splinters. Log him up, Dan. Craig Tolliver and Henry Jackson. Hurry those two along. You two are charged by Officer Patchett with disturbing the public peace and quarreling on the highway. What about it, Craig?
Well, Judge, I've been out of work this last week, and last evening I was standing down in front of Mr. Mackey's place, and Henry come on by. And when he passed on, I spoke to him very nice. I say, hello, Henry, where y'all going? He said, we're going. That's where we're going. I said, 'tain't far, is it? He said, maybe not, nigga, but don't be here when I come back. I say, Henry, we'll stand right here till my feet blossom. He said, nigga, if you're here when I come back, watch and pray. I said, ain't nobody go and pray, but I'm certainly going to do some watching. He come on back in about 5 minutes and got a knife with him long enough to row a boat with. And he approached me very peevishly. He say, Craig, there's nobody here but you and me, is it? I say, Henry, you certainly is wrong. There's nobody here but you. And I start running. And he come on after me and chased me around the block where I did twice. And second time around, my sister Magnolia come out the front gate. She said, Craig, what y'all running about? I said, don't ask me, Maggie, but have that gate open when I come around again. And that's all just do it, Judge. Officer Lee just tagged both of us.
5 days apiece in the chain gang. Finish your marathon there.
Well, I'll be.
Yeah. It is the most significant. It is the. It is Victor Records' version, if you will, on a different level, of D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, having that same kind of impact. It is probably, for me, in all of it, there's another record, a lynching comedy, which I don't have on that to share with you currently for this particular show. I do have an MP3 of it to share, though. But where I'm going is that this particular, what's significant about this recording, there's so much to contextualize, is the fact that this recording represents the most significant and profound definition for white society and white Americans who are buying records for their new phonograph toy, listening to this kind of commercialized messaging that had already been in the popular discussion in the Deep South or in across America around the issue, the Negro problem, the problem of the colored people after they were, freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. This particular recording defines in very visceral way. We're only listening to side one. There's more on side two of this skit. Defines a idea, creates an iconography in the newest, most important messaging device of technology of this time, which is the phonograph record. Before film, There is the phonograph record, before silent film. It makes this idea about this inherent criminality of Black men that dates back to Nat Turner, and that, Black men are in some way not just inherently criminal, but they are a threat to society, and therefore must be jailed or locked up or arrested or put on in the chain gangs. That is hugely made clear in this. This is one of the most important from looking at early recorded sound history and messaging, as I did, and I was actually commissioned in 2015 by the Recorded Sound Division of the Library of Congress to do a pilot titled, at that time, titled #Black Voices Matter, Music and Message at the Dawn of Recorded Sound. For me, this is one of the more consequential records, because if you look at the fact that this was never recorded for a Black audience, this was actually a skit, literally, from a stand-up comedy event, or you could go to, if you're in the LA area. I grew up in LA, so the comedy club, this would be something that would have been okay, and a narrative that was part of the national thinking of the time. And this was done and recorded or released in 1920. So before that, you have, of course, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which sets in motion this kind of thinking. So it's very. So let me just. I was going to ask.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. All right. So we were going to talk about Harry Pace and Black Swan record.
Right. So this is an important one.
Yeah. So I want to ask this question. So is Harry Pace, when he founds Black Swan Records, is he countering this type of music, or is he publishing the same type of thing? What's his deal? Is he saying, okay, enough of this crap, I want to do something more positive?
It's basically that. What we've just experienced for the past 5 to 6 minutes is essentially sets the stage for the understanding of why it's important for this other countering iconography idea, which is racial uplift. Harry Pace was orphaned at an early age. He was in the Atlanta area. His mentor and his, if you will, substitute father was W.E.B. Du Bois. And W.E.B. Du Bois had, by the 1900, before he wrote the monumental work called Souls of Black Folk, he had coined this idea, along with, let's say, Booker T. Washington, both of them significant at the turn of the century, of this idea of the talented 10th. The talented 10th were the best, the top of the line, the most educated, most gifted African Americans who he, if you will, ascribed to lead the race forward. So Harry Pace is very much aware of all of this, as is W.C. Handy. They're in the popular songwriting and song publishing business, but they are also, I would have to say, to answer your question directly, yes, this is a countering of all that. Certainly Harry Pace was first and foremost inspired by the 1920 runaway sales hit of Crazy Blues by Mamie Smith. But in essence, not only is he seeing that an opportunity, a business opportunity, I think, he's not speaking. I don't think there's a diary that we have to know, but I would ascribe to his actions a intentionality, if you will, to counter all of this other entertainment. Because Harry Pace, despite his success, despite his class, or he was very fair, could pass for white, despite all of that, he was still, for white people, like those guys in the skit of the Virginian Judge. It didn't matter how, this was a real challenge for W.E.B. Du Bois in the 1905 Niagara movement, in the founding of the NAACP in 1909, because you're only hearing a sample, a small sample. You should hear what I have between 1900 to 1910. Is it any wonder W.E. Du Bois and other progressive-minded African Americans had so much challenge getting moving the race forward into having, an appreciation of dignity, etc. Because you had this incredible messaging, commercialized messaging in the most popular form of entertainment. Before there was TV and radio.
And radio,
there
yeah.
were records. Hear this again. I'm going to repeat it like a minister. Before there was TV and radio, there were records, and the phonograph machine was the black and white TV of its day. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So Harry Pace, yes, he's countering that. He creates Black Swan as a statement of, if you will, in this particular line of thinking, from a black perspective, what he does is a statement of recognition of the business opportunity, but is also in some ways a statement of defiance. Because he was already aware that the white music publishing business, there were issues that he and W.C. Handy were having because there were threats made to them about the success of their music versus other white songwriters. The Tim Panally song. Tim Panally is really not just in the George Gershwin time. It precedes that. So it's, going from the 1890s forward. So, W.C. Handy, if you will, is, the king of the black Tim Panally of his day, the period being, from 1900 to 1914. But the problem is that their music was selling too much. And they were doing it themselves. Pace and Handy is a black-owned music publishing company. You see what I'm saying? So the through line between the fact that this was a black company doing too good in a Jim Crow time when they're not supposed to be able to do good, but that was a threat to the system.
Wow.
The creation of Black Swan was also a threat to the system, and it was met with extraordinary resistance.
So is it true that Harry Pace, in order to counter what you just described, used white musicians but changed the band names to...
That's later. Okay,
I see. Okay.
Wow. You want me to speak to that?
Speak to that. Speak to that a little bit.
Okay, so the bottom line is that the most important thing for people to understand about Harry Pace is an extraordinary businessman. Harry Pace arrives in Harlem and opens shop. We're open for business, Black Swan Records, within a month that the other black male business entrepreneurs and millionaires in Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, were having the shining hill, the shining city on the hill being completely destroyed. So the contrast is quite something, but for the North, post Great Migration time period, 1914 through 1918, Harry Pace is really one of the most important black business entrepreneurs, and understands the importance of setting a different path for black people to have an opportunity to have records. He's actually even thinking about, he doesn't do it, manufacturing, creating a Black Swan phonograph that black people could buy from other black people, kind of really anticipating what Marcus Garvey was talking about. The whole black empowerment, black self-determination, that is really very importantly rooted in this whole idea behind what Harry Pace is doing. He may not have thought it immediately that way, but that, as we look at it in retrospect, that is really intrinsic. So he does actually record and seek African-American songwriters and African-American talent. What you're referring to is that later, in 1922, facing a lot of resistance, and there was an opportunity that was ahead of its time, a smaller label, independent label, white record-owned company that had a label called Operaphone and Olympic, They were based in Long Island. That somehow he was able to have a conversation with this white business owner, because they also had a record producing plant in Long Island. He's in Harlem, that was closer than the record plants that he was being forced to use, because the white record companies were not allowing him to use record, plants near where he's located. This breakthrough opportunity in 1922 to own, to take over this other record company and their record plant, allowed him to have access to their recorded material. That's part of the story, which is really later, was after it became clear to the leading white record companies that there was a market for Black singers, and where there was a market, as in essence, for there was a sales market that the Black people bought records. Okay, that these other white companies like Paramount and OK and Columbia and Victor were much more well-funded, deeply funded operations, and they began to basically, how would I say, offer Bessie Smith, offer Ethel Waters, offer Alberta Hunter. I'm going to say specifically, Alberta Hunter, Trixie Smith, and Ethel Waters were the three queens, the Black queens of Black Swan Records through, I'm going to say, to the late 1922. Then by 1923, they left the label because Victor or Columbia offered them twice or three times the amount of money. So it was in that context that Harry Pace's, the Black Swan sales were so declining that he had this idea to use the recorded repertoire of this defunct record company of white musicians doing doing jazz or jazzy types of tunes and renaming them and putting their records out as his new records. There's a series of famous stories, but the bottom line,
Presley.
No, not that. So it would be like that. It would be like he would have an Elvis Presley record, and then Elvis would become, Eddie Jones, and his syncopators. But it's actually a white band. So that actually is a big issue that became public among his loyal Black, demographic buying audience, that he was doing that. And that really, if you will, was something that, was the pin in the balloon, if you will. I mean, everything really at that point began to go downhill. But before that, in this time period when he's really just beginning to get really going, and he's done this outrageous thing as a colored man, having this collaboration between this white record company, owner, and this colored man, and buying the white guy out, which is unheard of in 1921. That kind of thing would have gotten you burned to the ground, one was in Greenwood, in Tulsa. That kind of out of the box, that's a defiance of the systemic, structure for Black people to stay in place. So the fact that he did that enraged many of his competitors. And some of the competitors were involved in the raw materials that made records. What was the raw material for records of 78 was coal. Coal was an essential part of that. So in the pressing plant, the Black Swan pressing plant, which had previously been a white-owned pressing plant. This was in Long Island. Famously, someday, I don't have the exact date, but it was in February of 1922. Understand that the company had been opened, let's say May of 1921. So within less than 8 months after their founding, someone had it in for Harry Pace and his venture. There were two coal companies delivering coal to the factory on one particular day. The deliveries were not separated; it was all together. And it was only I guess, the hand of God, if you will, that this little, as one of the people responsible for putting the coal in the furnace to create the shellac, happened, it was an act of God, really, there, that somehow in one of the shovelings that he was doing, out of somewhere, out of nowhere, this round thing showed up. The round thing was a bomb that was reported, and there's evidence of, there's newspaper clippings and stuff. This bomb was determined by the bomb squad, I guess in Long Island, to be not just a small bomb. This bomb was big enough to destroy the whole, not just kill people, the whole plant, this whole warehouse. So the intention and the resistance to Harry Pace's venture and this idea of racial uplift and of having a successful Black business venture in the recording industry at this time was clearly not wanted, to say the least.
Yeah. Wow, incredible. All right, so let me just ask you this now. Okay, he's going through all of this. What made Black Swan go away?
Simple things. One, as we just spoke about, his core Black demographic buying audience began to recognize that the records that he was putting out as new were done by white artists. Also, the word got out from his leading artists who were given better offers at other record companies, that Black Swan, they basically snitched on him, essentially saying, it's not what it looks like. And Harry Pace is also, there's another piece of this which is very important, that's was actually, it's part of the 2+ hours that I talked about in conversation with the NYC people about this whole idea of color and class. Harry Pace is motivated to create Black Swan Records because of the success of a blues record by Mamie Smith on OK Records. But he comes from a place of color and class in the Deep South, or in Atlanta, and in the, the more color conscious upper, the Black elite, if you will, circles of W.E. Du Bois. He knows that he's creating a record company because of the success of Mamie Blues, Crazy Blues. But what does he do? His first records are all basically Black high society, light classical material. He finds, singers like Reveille Hughes in particular, and C. Carol Clark, wonderful singers. I mean, they would be, for all of us who've grown up in Black church, they would be the stars in the choirs. Wow. What he did was take that kind of voice, which makes sense, but have them record. He decides what they're going to record. These are light classical tunes. These are not what really his demographic market is interested in, but this is what he's interested in. This is also part of this whole other idea of racial uplift. When racial uplift is essentially a turn of the 20th century idea coming from Black and intellectually about ascribing to certain selected Black people who have come from the right families or have a great business entrepreneur.
That's a whole show right there, brother.
All of that, and then musically, or not even just musically, the idea really is about, we can prove to white America at the turn of the 20th century that Black people are just as talented or successful or deserving by proving our success in their fields. So classical music, there's a lot behind this, so, but I'll just simply say, so the first recordings of Black Swan were of light classical music. It is only when, by chance or by recommendation of his music people, Fletcher Henderson was his, I'm going to say his A&R person. And then you have the young composer, William Grant Still, as the music arranger. It is only when someone says to Fletcher Henderson, you need to come down to this bar and hear the singer. The singer was the young singer, Ethel Waters. And Ethel Waters, he meets Pace meets Ethel Waters. He's heard so much about her, and he invites her to make a record. And it was only then, with her first recording of Down Home Blues and Oh Daddy in 1921, that the record company really took off. If it had not been for Ethel Waters, this record, Black Swan, would have folded by the end of the 6th month, because of the fact that Harry Pace is in essence conflicted. He's really creating this record company because he sees the opportunity financially, and he understands that there's a captive audience, a black captive, a black captive market for records of songs by black artists performed by black artists. But yet, what does he do? His first run of records, are essentially records that would be very popular in the color conscious society clubs, of New York or Philadelphia, West Philadelphia. My parents are from North Philadelphia. We were all brown skinned. My mother and father talked about this. How West Philadelphia was all about color, and the families you came from and the schools you went to, wet church, this whole idea of sedity, silk stocking, all of that is a part of Harry Pace. And that's very important to be talked about. I talked about that at great length in the Vanishing Harry Pace. It wasn't used, but this is really foundational to understanding what happened, because people have said to what's up? Right, why did Harry Pace? I mean, this was the model, but then he did this. What's that about? Right. Well, and that ended up being the problem throughout, because he actually took ads in the Crisis magazine and in the New Amsterdam News and in the Chicago Defender about what's wrong? Colored people just don't like classic music. Why is that? I'm going to change that by offering all of these records and recordings of these really wonderful artists to kind of push that through. Well, it didn't work. His buying audience were interested in the blues records. So there was a disconnect. It was based on class, based on color, and based on these conflicted ideas about the direction of what he should be doing. I think that this whole idea of the talented 10th and about racial uplift was for him personally, the motivation. Because you'll see even after the fact, the success of Down Home Blues by Ethel Waters, and because of that success, they do a whole road show in 1921. Like the Motown review shows of the early '60s or the mid '60s. He does all that, but then he continues to record classical music. There's the red-colored Black Swan, the concert Black Swan, which are specifically operatic. Florence, there's a series, I don't need to bore you here. I mean, I have, I could write a book on it as well, but I'll just say there are specific singers, many of whom are also passing. It's really interesting when I'm looking at this whole story of Harry Pace. Here is a bright, gifted, one of the most important bright, gifted black business entrepreneurs in the North, on the East Coast. The others are all in Tulsa and Greenwood. But here is the most important black business entrepreneur on the East Coast, who ends up having, this is fast forward, but in some ways, this whole idea, this iconography around the quote unquote, the tragic mulatto, that shows up in Showboat with Julie, shows up in the famous movie with Freddie Washington, Imitation of Life. All of that is also embedded in Harry Pace in some way. And that is part of the decline. In addition to the fact that the white record industry started stealing his top talent. Second, his records were having challenges in distribution. That's a huge piece I haven't talked about. The normal channels of distribution were blocked. So Harry Pace, again, using his extraordinary business acumen, and this is why W.E.B. Du Bois considered him to be part of the Talented Ten, is that he recognized that there was, in the world of this time, which was a segregated world, that Black communities and Black people supported Black people and Black product. So like Madam C.J. Walker, who was the queen of Black hair products for Black women, where she was not a threat to the white, hair products.
Right.
Harry Pace was a threat, but Harry Pace was smart enough to recognize there was an opportunity for him to connect with, in this particular case, very significant group for marketing and sales, the Pullman Porters. Different unions and different groups. He actually hired them. There were ads in the Black newspapers hiring, I am hiring for the summer, talented Black men who want to, as salespersons and distributors for my records. And so he created this whole network between the Pullman Porters, between the churches, between the social clubs, the Black social clubs, the Black Masons, all of that there was this intricate channel of distribution that Harry Pace was able to create for his records. Obviously, the most popular records were the blues records. But the challenge in the long run, why Black Swan fails is because, one, all of his talent is siphoned off and paid twice or three times as much by these other companies that create what's called race record divisions or race record labels within their larger. Two, it becomes clear to his buying audience that he's done this disingenuous thing of reissuing all of these old white records from the Olympic label and renaming them as Black artists when they were not. And then just the fact that his plant was going to be bombed there was an intention to completely destroy him, like in Greenwood. The 1922 attempted bombing of the Black Swan record plant was as significant a statement as the destruction of Greenwood and Tulsa. So during this time period, the idea of Black people lifting themselves from their bootstraps and being successful in business is uniquely or distinctively across the country at this time a statement of defiance. And it's strange because, not strange, I mean, it's understood, but it is interesting when we look at that even more so in the wake of Black success and engagement in World War I. You have all of these, from Lieutenant James Reese Europe, who's very famous in France for his band and for all of that. But you have all these battalions, segregated battalions in France during World War I, coming back to this country and expecting, to have a more dignified place. And then in the middle of that, you have before you have Great Migration going on because people are sick and tired of all this shit in the Deep South. But you have World War I, you have the Great Migration, you have Madam C.J. Walker, who's already successful. You have, 4 or 5 millionaires in Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The reaction to all of this is just unbelievable. It's tragic, but it's a statement of American history and American reality. This is the statement that all of these people who are trying to prohibit what they call critical race theory. Critical race theory is not related to this, but they created, basically, these people don't want you to know the history that we're talking about today.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, I think I've said more than enough.
Yeah. Bill, I mean, this is really, really fascinating. And I was thinking in the back of my mind when you were saying that he, pulled the switcheroo on the consumers, and I was wondering, could the consumers hear the difference, in his music? And you're saying that's a part of the downfall. Now, let me just ask you this, because I listened to the entire series on WNYC, The Vanishing of Harry Pace, and wait for it, audience, wait for it here. So Harry Pace vanishes from our memory, sort of. And that's what this podcast is really all about. And his family, his descendants, a couple of generations now moved to this present day, are white, but everybody, they're white, but they didn't know that Harry Pace was a Black man. They did not know his contribution to Black American history. Can you explain that a little bit clearer than me? And man, what a fascinating story.
It's not just fascinating. It's actually quite amazing, incredible, also conflicted. This is, and let me just try to be as to the point as possible.
Sure.
Harry Pace is a Black man. He is notably a Black man. He is identified as Black. He is a harbinger, a leader for the race, just as significant as W.E.B. Du Bois is in his time. And the challenge is, and that's a lot, there's a lot involved in here, but I'm going to just kind of try to summarize it. The challenge is after Black Swan record fails and he sells it, he goes to Chicago. He has already, before he's in Chicago, he's already has a side gig, if you will, as the owner of a Black-owned life insurance company. And he buys a bunch of other smaller ones and creates this mega Black life insurance company in the 20s and through the 30s. He is, I think it's called Superior Life Insurance in Chicago. He buys a major building. And this is one of the heavy hitter. I mean, this cat is as significant in his era as, as John Johnson, who would create Ebony magazine, or any other, the guy from BET, I think is also another Johnson, yeah. Bob Johnson. He is the Bob Johnson, and he's the BET and Ebony and Black Enterprise of his era. But the challenge is it is very interesting that he apparently marries another. His wife is also passing. He basically imagined the male-female versions of Freddie Washington. Very color conscious, very, able to enter, these, more Black elite circles and intellectual circles. And that was all a part of that time period. He is, for some reason, he gets into this whole thing about the neighborhoods, and the whole racial covenant things in Chicago. And there's a whole big story that's even more historic about how he desegregates certain all-white neighborhoods in Chicago. But the bottom line, fast forward, is that after having a very important Chicago-based Black life insurance company, after being well known throughout all of Black Chicago as a Black person, he makes, and being recorded in the 1930 census as a Negro, by 1940, he makes the decision that he is going to be white. And he is recorded in the 1940 census as a white man. Part of that is, according to the book of Paul Slade and through the series that we're talking about, the Vanishing Harry Pace, is a decision based on that decision. I think was influenced by the fact that that unlike what often happens in marriages, the children of two light-skinned people, there can be a dark-skinned child. But in this case, both of his daughter and his son were both light-skinned and were sent off to college, I think in Wisconsin, and they fell in love with other white people. Somewhere along the line, this idea about skin color and class changes Harry Pace's idea about himself. And apparently that he and his wife make a decision as well that it is better for them, and especially with their children who have boyfriend, girlfriend, who are white, who actually are going to be married. So when it came time to meet the family, the parents, it was much for a public face for in his family. And in the fact that he was able to pass enough to actually live in a white neighborhood, in one of the whiter, more desirable neighborhoods in Chicago, that this whole idea of passing, this whole imitation of life, this Freddie, Pinky with Ethel Waters, all of this is, he manifests and realizes all of that in real time and is threatened by his Black employees at his life insurance company who are hip to this, or seeing what's going, they're seeing what's going on, and they threatened to boycott, to come en masse and boycott in front of his house, to basically out him. The idea of outing someone. They were intentional. The threat to out him was so real that he ended up completely moving away from, or this is actually the word I'm actually seeking for, is disassociating himself with everyone who is actually Black. So this is very unusual and powerful decision that he and his wife make, essentially, that they will no longer be Black. And as several people have said, this is Ava DuVernay. This is a movie, a series of movies. I mean, here is the most important Black business entrepreneur of his time on the East Coast, in the North, where the others were all in Tulsa, in Greenwood. Here is the most, after the failure of Black Swan, he then has a mega success in Black life insurance. And he actually, there's video on an interview of John Johnson, the Ebony magazine, in a discussion of how he met Harry Pace. Harry Pace was the speaker at his high school graduation. John Johnson's a dark-skinned Black man, or our color, I think darker maybe. He meets Harry Pace. He's inspired by him. Harry Pace becomes somewhat of his own mentor. He has an idea of creating a magazine, a Black, interest magazine. Harry Pace had tried that in Memphis, I think around 1908, with W.E.B. Du Bois. That failed. And of course, you have the whole series of Black-owned magazines that fail. But he gives him an idea for Negro Digest. And Negro Digest would become Ebony magazine. But Harry Pace could have done that himself. But yet he inspires this other person. But Harry Pace, in a way that is hard to explain, is clearly conflicted because by the time he meets John Johnson, and they have this conversation about a Negro Digest, which would become Ebony, Harry Pace has already decided that he's going to be white. Wow. So it's deep. It's deep. I mean, it's so deep. It's like, wow, how is that possible? How is it possible for one of W.E.B. Du Bois's most talented of the talented 10, who has demonstrated all of this success and all of this stamina and this, what I call transformative resilience, to go beyond all of these threats and to survive, and then to be a successful businessman in Chicago? How does this happen? But that is the $64,000 question.
And so then his memory comes to consciousness because his picture is on the wall of his family, present day. Finally, somehow somebody says, "Who is this guy that's been on our wall for all this time?" And the grandfather begins to tell the story of Harry Pace and the children, who are now, I guess you would say they're the generation behind us, Bill. They're like, yo, we thought we were white all this time,
Right.
and that's really, really something. I invited what's his name? Eric Pace. I've invited him to come on Coffee Conversations to discuss this. But it was it tickled me to hear it on the podcast where he was saying, man, I'm all this time I'm loving R&B music and reggae music. It's in his soul, it really tickled me to hear that. And that as an adult, he finds out that he is actually of black descent. Man,
right. That had been hidden by, and this is important to add to your remarks. He and his wife during their lifetime. I'm going to say after this whole issue with there was a big another story about how the importance of Harry Pace for desegregating. Chicago. I mean, that's yet another story. But somewhere after their kids go to college, the two of them make a decision that they're going to be white, known as white. That's why by 1940 census, they mark themselves as white. Harry Pace is a overachiever, an alpha personality, was not taking care of his health. He dies, has a heart attack in 1943. Immediately, this is someone who would have had thousands of people at his funeral normally, but because of this controversy about whether he was black or white and his decision to be white, his wife takes him to be buried in almost an unmarked grave. Where I'm going with that is that simply his wife, the grandmother of these younger generation Paces, there was a decision made for whatever reason that Harry Pace is white. Harry Pace must always be known to be a white person. So again, this whole idea of imitation of life. Certainly his wife knew who her husband was, and the significance of her husband as a black man and as a black businessman. But a decision was made before he died, and his wife, that all of that must be hidden, never talked about, never revealed. And it is only in conversations, I guess, in the past 10 to 15 years, and one in particular with Paul Slade, who is in Britain, in London, who starts doing the more research and writing, that he is in touch with them. There's another piece of this too. I'm in touch, and I can invite to your show for the future Carlos Handy, who is the grandson of W.C. Handy. And it's Pace and Handy Music Publishing. So Carlos Handy has additional perspective and has much of the original material, correspondence between W.C. Handy and Harry Pace. There is a lot to be discovered still, but the biggest $64,000 question here is what really happened, other than the fact that you have two light-skinned children who you send off to college who fall in love with other white people, for Christmas, the kids want to bring their boyfriend or girlfriend home, that there was this need at this time to for lack of a better term, to pretend to be white for your children's sake. And then once the person of the house dies, the decision must continue that he's white. He never did any of this stuff. Although the reality is that there were a ton of people living all the way through the 70s who were probably 1970s or 1960s who were probably employees of Harry Pace.
Right.
It's like, that's deep.
Yeah, it's very, very deep. Wow, Bill Doggett, man, thank you so much for coming to Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Couple things. We're going to have you back a couple of times. I got a few other things that now that I learn more about your collection and everything, that I must have you on to talk about. Blacks in Opera. I really want to get in that. I want to get in there. And then too, man, you got to come to Long Beach. Let's have some live discussions with the community and talk about our history, our music history. our arts history in America. I mean, just fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for coming on, y'all. Man, great. You guys see his website there, BillDoggettProductions.com, BillDoggettProductions.com. You can always see this broadcast, as all of our other ones, on our Facebook page, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. You'll be able to see it a little later on Beach City Radio, beachcityradio.com. And of course on YouTube. The audio version will be up a little later on today, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm talking iHeart, Apple, Google, Spreaker. Just Google it. It'll be out there for you. Man, this has been fascinating history. I mean, I got work to do. I could keep him on another hour, but I've got things to do.
I would be happy to. And yes, obviously. And I think that, if I can say anything as we close, is that the most important thing you're hearing today is the important contextualization of this history from a Black scholar and Black historian idea, and more than just an idea, is how do we look at the life of Harry Pace beyond just as a, as what has been put out there as the owner of the first Black record company, as the first essential Berry Gordy. But there's so much more to this story, and then you contextualize it in the historical time period, especially making the connection, which I think is very powerful for everybody to remember. Harry Pace in Harlem, Harlem Renaissance is really generally spoken as 1924 to 1925, 1929, excuse me. Harry Pace is in Harlem in 1920. Black Swan opens in 1921. That's the dawn, before dawn of the Harlem Renaissance. But when Harry Pace puts on his office door open for business, white vigilantes are destroying Greenwood and Tulsa within, I think, a month's time. This is quite a contrast, and this is quite a conversation to be had around the challenge, the white societal response and resistance to Black success, to Black identity and economic self-determination post-Civil War. You have to understand, or I would like to say in a nicer way, we are talking about within 55 to 60 years after the end of the Civil War. Okay. You have a Black self-determination and Black people who have brought themselves up from their bootstraps and created these shining examples of Black business in a deeply segregated world, but for which the response by white people is destruction. It's crazy.
Well, there you have it, y'all. That's American history. It happened. While y'all talk about critical race theory and 1619 Project and all this stuff, y'all don't want to hear about it, but it happened. Can't take that from us. It happened.
Yeah, and it can't take. And even though Harry Pace's wife essentially made a decision, or they both made a decision, that all of this history of Harry Pace would be lost or hidden or buried, that he would be white. We are now finding out that, this was a genius. If it were possible, I don't think we could change the trajectory, but if we could travel back in time and give him a idea about the future, this is one of the most significant Black businessmen of the first part of the 20th century.
Wow.
It's deep. This man, if he hadn't had this conflicted issue about identity based on color, and seeing the challenges, I think, and seeing the challenges to what it meant to be Black in American society of his time. And since he had the opportunity to pass, to be light-skinned, and saw all of the opportunity that brought, as opposed to people that look like you and me, it's quite It's that by itself is quite a conversation. I mean, to think about that. I mean, what was going on in his head, by 1940, when he was, by 1940, one of the most successful Black businessmen and entrepreneurs in all of Chicago. So,
well, there you have it, y'all.
Another time.
Yes. Thank you again, man. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. We're telling our own story. That's what we're about. Dream Creator Studio, Hannibal Media Group, Peach City Radio, Columbus On Coffee Company. We're telling stories our way. There it is. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Remember, love one another. Love one another. Love one another. Peace and blessings.